Parents kicked me out of the house before my SAT, so my sister could accommodate her friends for her wedding and told me to go live on the streets when I asked for help. Hey everyone, so I'm 17 and for a pretty long time now, I've been preparing for the SAT. But my family is literally the worst. They decided to kick me out of the house and wanted to send me to stay with my aunt in the suburbs just because my sister is getting married in 2 weeks. She had invited her friends over to stay at her house. I don't understand why she couldn't have just asked them to stay in a hotel like all the other guests. It would have cost her money, but given the fact that it's her wedding, I think she shouldn't have been so miserly. Besides, our parents are paying for a lot of things anyway, so I don't think it would have been an issue for them to cover that too. My parents didn't even tell me beforehand, so I could make arrangements for myself. They decided to spring it on me the evening before her friends were supposed to fly in and told me I needed to vacate my room by the next evening, within 24 hours. I tried to argue and tell them that her friends could stay in the living room or the guest room, since there were almost 7 of them, but they said it would be impolite to have her friends stay in the living room when I'm getting a full room to myself. They started lecturing me about how important it is to have some sense of hospitality when we have guests, even though these aren't even my guests, and I didn't even know they were coming until the very last minute. Also, Melissa, my sister, and her fiancé, Jack, have their own apartment, so I suggested that maybe some of her friends could stay with them. But my parents told me that wouldn't be possible because they didn't want any guests staying with them, as it would add to the stress of the wedding. Basically, I tried everything to convince them not to kick me out of the house, but my parents weren't having it. Melissa had promised her friends they'd be staying with her parents, and they had already agreed, so now I would just have to do what they asked. I made a huge fuss about it because, honestly, I had no intention of going to stay with my aunt before the SATs. She's a really eccentric person and doesn't believe in the internet, so she has no Wi-Fi. That would seriously affect my studies because I didn't want to use up all my data. I even tried to explain that to my parents, but they told me that I could just take my books with me, as if that would be enough to. Another major reason I didn't want to go live with my aunt this week is because she lives in the suburbs, which is really far from where I need to take my SAT. I simply couldn't afford to be late for something like this, and the commute would take way too long from her place. I tried to request my parents not to do this, and I even said that I would make the sacrifice and stay in the living room myself, but they told me it would be unseemly, and I just had to leave. They weren't willing to entertain any more arguments. I hadn't told them that I would refuse to leave and that they couldn't make me, but my parents told me that if I didn't go on my own, they would throw all my stuff out on the street and warn me not to test them. That was it, and I couldn't argue with them anymore. A couple of hours later, I had pretty much given up, packed my stuff, and my parents told me they were happy that I had made the right choice and was doing something good for the family. Then they told me I needed to call my aunt and ask her if she would be okay with having me over until the wedding. That's when I realized that my parents hadn't even bothered to speak to my aunt about this, and they expected me to do everything. So I lost it and started screaming at them. They told me it wasn't their responsibility to take care of me because I was almost an adult now and needed to look out for myself. I thought that was insane because I wasn't actually an adult yet, I was just 17, and even if I was technically 18, they still would have had some responsibility toward me because they are literally my parents. I was very upset with them, so I decided to start unpacking and told my parents that I wasn't going anywhere. Then they started yelling at me and told me I couldn't do this because they had already promised Melissa they would accommodate her friends and treat them well, which meant I had to give up my room. I tried to tell them that accommodating Melissa's friends wasn't as important as my SAT, and as my parents, they should be more understanding of what I need instead of constantly prioritizing Melissa over me, but they were just not interested. Eventually, even though I knew it would be pointless, I decided to call Melissa for help. She and I have never really gotten along, and I know she doesn't like me nor do I like her, but I thought that just for this once, maybe she would be willing to speak to our parents and help me out because I really did not want to get kicked out of my house just a few days before the SAT. But when I called her up and told her to do something about the situation and speak to our parents, she told me to put her on speaker. Then she said that she wanted me to hear it loud and clear. She had already promised her friends they would stay with her family, and she wasn't going back on that promise. So now, she didn't care if I had to prepare for the SAT or whatever. She wanted me out of the house, and if I couldn't find a place to stay, I could go live on the streets if I wanted to. She just wanted me out. I think that was probably the most heartless thing she's ever done. The fact that my parents were just standing by and not even saying anything made me realize that I was really not an important part of this family. Also, if I'm being honest, I don't even think they consider me family at all. That was pretty much the last straw for me, and without another word, I took my bags and went over to a friend's place. Obviously, it wasn't an ideal situation because I feel like a burden on their family, even though they've been very kind and told me I'm welcome to stay with them for as long as I need to. They understand that I'm in a very difficult situation right now. It's been 4 days since I left home, and yesterday I finally took the SAT. Thankfully, it went pretty well in spite of the fact that I had been very troubled the past couple of days. But after that, when I came back, I decided to allow myself to actually think about what happened. Ever since I left, everything had been a blur for me because even though I had been feeling terrible about what had happened, I hadn't let myself think about it much because I needed to focus on scoring well, and that's where I channeled all my energy. But now that I didn't have to worry about the SAT anymore, I could think about how my family had treated me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got because it was all just so unfair. I really couldn't see any reason why I couldn't stay in the house and why I absolutely had to leave. Even if I didn't give up my room, I could have stayed in the living room, but for some reason, they just didn't want me around. It was humiliating. I was so upset that I decided to reach out to Jack, Melissa's fiancé, and tell him all about it. I didn't intend to ruin things for her. I just thought he should know what kind of person he was marrying and what kind of family he was marrying into. I honestly had no idea that this one move would have such extreme repercussions. There's just 1 week to go before the wedding, and this morning I found out from my parents that everyone is losing their mind because apparently Jack has decided to call off the wedding. They know that this is my fault because they are among the few people who know the real reason why Jack made this decision. Apparently, after I sent him the message last night, he confronted Melissa and asked her what was going on. She told him the truth, that she had made her parents kick me out of the house so they could accommodate her friends who had flown in for her wedding. Just like any reasonable person, Jack wasn't happy about it because it seemed very unnecessary to kick me out during such an important phase of my life, right before the SATs. I had mentioned I had been preparing for the past couple of months, and everyone knew about it, including Melissa and my parents. He suggested the same solutions I had earlier, like I could have just stayed in the living room, or maybe some of her friends could have stayed with them, or they could have stayed in a hotel. But Melissa kept making excuses until she finally admitted she just didn't want me in the house or at the wedding. The reason she didn't want me around was that she found me really annoying. She didn't want to constantly have to see me around. That was it. The only reason she didn't want me around and put me through all this trouble was because she found me annoying. My parents had also been on board with it, which was even worse. Of course, when she said this to Jack, they got into a huge fight. He accused her of being heartless and told her she was one of the most selfish people he had ever met. He demanded that she apologize to me and make things right with her family, but she refused to do that. She didn't want to apologize to me, and when she tried to blame it on me, saying that she was only doing what her parents told her to do, Jack told her she couldn't blame anyone but herself for this situation. I don't know what to think right now. I really didn't expect things to escalate this way. I feel like everything is falling apart, and I'm not sure if I even want to go back to that house or go to the wedding anymore. I just feel like I don't belong there.